Welcome to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. I am David Haugh from 670 The Score, the Mullen Haugh Show. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune out at Haugh Hall. Dan, we finally heard from Ryan Poles. He set the tone for the offseason in his end of the year annual press conference. You were in the room. I had just gotten off the air. I would listen to it. You asked some of the questions, good questions. How would you describe overall what your biggest takeaway was being there and hearing from the Bears general manager?
Yeah, just a couple hours ago, right over here to my right, Ryan Poles sat beside Matt Eberflus, who was largely ignored for the first 20 minutes of that gathering because we had a lot of ground to cover with the general manager, who is entering a pivotal offseason in his role on this job. And what I think we got, David, was a very grounded, realistic assessment of what this team just went through in 2022, of where they want to head in 2023 and beyond, and a general manager who understands that this is a big, beautiful window of opportunity that's in front of him, and that he has to both approach it with sort of eagerness and urgency, but also some patience and discipline to not try to fix everything right away. And so it's going to be a really interesting offseason to watch him kind of ski that slope and figure out how gracefully he can do it.
Before we get into some of the details, I think the biggest takeaway for me was, after having experienced many of these in person and over the years, especially in recent years, maybe the biggest headline or the biggest news was that there was no blockbuster news, that they were not doing anything, saying anything that would qualify as a misstep, as a foible. There wasn't anything controversial about what Ryan Poles said. You used the words grounded and realistic, and boy, was that a welcome change. They need that at Haugh Hall.
And honest, it didn't feel like there was a lot of skirting or dodging or subterfuge that was going on within it. And I've appreciated that about Ryan in his first year here. I think, David, this might be the first year out of 10 that I've been on the beat that we haven't heard from George McCaskey following one of these gatherings. Usually there's something small, and in some years it's really big because they're making landmark changes, as they've done a few times here. But we didn't hear from the owner to kind of get his perspective on the GM's perspective. So that leaves us with kind of Ryan's words driving the bus right now. And I think that his words drive the bus in a direction that most people want it to go. And, his stated goal today is open for interpretation. Basically said that 2023 is about taking the next step. And I think we can all kind of redefine what that means in 2023. But our eyes are going to tell us if the Bears are taking the next step and whether the potential progress that they can make with all the resources available to them is actually being made.
Smart move by leaving George McCaskey off the podium and away from the microphones for a couple reasons, in my opinion. Number one, I think that the only questions, the most relevant questions that he would have been asked, he could not answer, about Kevin Warren, about the stadium move to Arlington Heights, things that the Bears would, rather not address at this point in time. And secondly, it just goes without saying that the further away that George McCaskey is from these season-ending press conferences, the more credibility they probably will have based on recent history. You just don't want to have a soundbite that lingers. You don't want to have something that's awkward or clumsy, and there have been too many examples to cite. So this was a good move in terms of optics by the Bears to just let the general manager sit next to the head coach and them answer questions for half an hour and then get on with the offseason.
Yeah, well, and listen, like you said that there were a lot of questions asked. I got to pretty much everything on my list here. There was only I would qualified as 1.5 questions on my list that we didn't get to. One of them was about Tevin Jenkins' durability. The other one was about what they do with the group of guys that includes Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, and Jalen Johnson, who are part of that draft class from a few years ago that now are in line for extensions this offseason. That's the one that was half answered because I think we got some telling words on both Darnell Mooney and Cole Kmet from the general manager and answers to other questions. So we can get into all that. And obviously a lot of this is always going to revolve around the quarterback and Justin Fields and how the brain trust here feels about him and where they think he's headed. And I thought there was some really telling stuff on that front as well.
I think it was telling. So let's get on with the details, because I do think that I heard a Bears franchise that was committed to Justin Fields.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like Ryan Poles did not slam shut the door on the chatter that the Bears could potentially use the number 1 overall pick on a quarterback, but he did say, I'd have to be blown away to make a decision that bold. And so there's an acknowledgement here that they've loved what they've seen out of Justin Fields in 2022, that they've identified areas of weakness that they're really pushing him to grow on, and that they want to take a swing at this in 2023 to see where they can take it. I've always thought that that's the best approach. You're going to get, I believe, an opportunity here in 2023 to really let it play out in front of you and to leave really nothing to interpretation. If all goes well, Justin is going to be north of 40 starts by the time we get to this time next year. And at that point, I don't know that there's many starting quarterbacks in NFL history whose future is open for interpretation. At that point, you usually know at 40 plus starts what you're working with and what a guy has to show you and where he's headed. So that'll be interesting. I also thought it was really interesting to hear Ryan Poles openly acknowledge the level of forgiveness that he's been given in 2022, that a 14-loss season just went by the wayside here without anyone banging on the doors at Hallis Hall and raging, like we've seen so many times in seasons that have had long losing streaks and seasons that have had pronounced struggle. And there was, some honesty in his expression of that. I thought also, I don't know how you reacted, but him sort of saying that his reaction to Sunday afternoon and what happened in Indianapolis that we obviously talked to Rich Campbell about earlier in the week with the Texans gifting the Bears the number 1 pick for this draft was something that in the moment he didn't really care about. And even later when he was in his neighborhood and a neighbor drove by and a buddy said, hey, congratulations on the number 1 pick, he wasn't feeling it.
Well, that was encouraging. I don't know if that's entirely true, but he did tell, he doubled down on it. He said it once and then he repeated it again. So I have to take his word for it. As for what he said about Fields, and you are always going to be open to that slim possibility. So he did say that unless he was blown away, he didn't envision, drafting a quarterback with the first overall pick. I think what it sounded like to me was any sports writer who's covered any team and any executive before a trade deadline will always ask if you have any untouchables. And always the case may be, well, nobody's untouchable. And if you hear an offer you can't refuse, you're going to trade your most valued and cherished player. And so you always have to leave that door open a crack. And I think similarly on Tuesday at Hallis, that's what Ryan Poles was doing. Unless he's totally blown away, as he said, by the tape of Will Levis, C.J. Stroud, or Bryce Young, I think that the Bears will be fully committed to Justin Fields and trade that pick to acquire more assets. But I cannot really see a realistic scenario that involves them drafting a quarterback with the first pick.
Hey, at least the door is open for us to go do some more research on quarterbacks in pre-draft season, which always does the needle movement.
It sounds like somebody who just wants to trip to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, no, I'll skip that during the pre-draft process.
He can go.
Yeah, exactly. He can head on down there. I think it was also interesting that Ryan Poles had a pretty lengthy opening statement before we even got to questions. And within that was sort of his recognition of what he believes was laid foundation-wise in this past year. And he referenced things like discipline, that the penalties that this team committed in 2022 were low, and that there weren't a lot of weeks where you left the stadium going, man, that team is just out of sorts and doesn't know what it's doing. He mentioned the bond and the unselfishness in the locker room, which, again, I put this on Twitter. I'm a believer in the strength of a locker room and what it means to a team. But I've also sat in this building for 10 years and heard a lot of last place teams talk about the bond and the unselfishness they've had in the locker room. So it only goes so far. And so I'm glad you have it, but I want more. I want more talent. I want more depth. I want more playmakers in there. And then he talked about the toughness and ultimately the experience. He believes that a lot of young players, particularly rookies, got experience within the 2022 season that ultimately, if they are starters or depth pieces up the road, will help them at a time when the Bears are intended to compete and are expected to be successful. So that was notable from the general manager. And then just going back to that topic of the patience that has been shown by the city, and in some ways, not just patience, but a celebration of the losing. Ryan Poles even addressed that. And here's some of what he said about that at the outset.
I was blown away this season at the stadium, around town, at restaurants, with the amount of understanding that they know with where this organization is and where it's headed. I appreciate their patience. I know they've been waiting a long time to sustain success for a long period of time. But I thought it was really cool to just meet a lot of people that understood where we were going and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. I think two things can be true, too. I think you can be disappointed in the losses, right? That's not what we're here to do. It hurts. I joked earlier, like, it feels like part of your football soul gets ripped out when you got to do it over and over and over again. But the resilience that this organization showed was outstanding.
David, I do think that is notable commentary from the general manager, and I think it's candid and forthright. I think there's a little bit of revisionist history here in January about what this team was ultimately trying to accomplish. I remember vividly walking from the locker room or from the press box to the locker room at Gillette Stadium in October and talking with Ryan Poles on that walk and feeling his energy and his sense that they were kind of on the verge of potentially doing more than what he thought they were capable of. That was their last win of the season. And I think there was a stretch, really, if you go back to probably the Giants game at the start of October through the Atlanta game right before Thanksgiving, where that stretch of losing close games gnawed at the general manager. He said it hurt his football soul, and so I think there's kind of this idea that the whole year was plotted so that they could get the number one pick. And I think if you go back and you live those moments from the start of October through Thanksgiving, you understand that wasn't the unwavering MO of this team, and that during those periods that the guy who's running this football team felt agitated, felt aggravated, felt frustrated and upset that his team wasn't getting done what he thinks it can get done. Remember, he comes from an organization that has been a staple on Conference Championship Sunday for 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, the revisionist history. What I heard in the comments on Tuesday was basically his way of saying, thank you, Chicago, for giving me a pass.
Yeah.
Because he got one. He got one in year one. He was a guy that did want to, I think, win more games than 3. I think that the notion that this was an orchestrated attempt at losing the tank the North, is convenient right now, but I don't know if it's entirely accurate for what you just described, as well as the move that they made to get Chase Claypool. If this indeed were a team that was hell-bent on finishing with the worst record in the NFL, what are you doing trading a pick that you could have envisioned or anticipated would be at the end of the first round because of the Dolphins' discipline? So I don't know if this was as by design as it's being sort of framed right now in mid-January. It's convenient, and I think Ryan Poles at least recognizes that he did get a pass. He took advantage of a fan base and a media corps, no offense to either one of us, but that has been softened by the idea that this is a great thing that they are drafting first overall. Oh, by the way, those 14 losses, we don't see those because all we see is April, 15 weeks till the draft.
Well, yeah, and free agency, March 13th, save the date card, which I gave you earlier in the week.
That's right.
So you get ready for that negotiating window. Look, like the other part of this is understanding what the resources that Ryan Poles has are worth. And when you have the number one pick and you have quarterback needy teams lining up behind you on the draft board, you did buy yourself flexibility. You're either going to walk into the month of May with the player that you deem to be the best prospect in the 2023 draft class, or you're going to have resources upon resources to build a roster that you hope can be competitive for a long time. So it's a total win-win at this point, what they're working with at the top of the draft board. With $110 million worth of salary cap space, you've got an opportunity to go into free agency with few restrictions, and you can obviously try to do, in the words of Ryan Poles, stay sound with your decision-making and not get reckless, but you don't have to feel impeded or obstructed that you can get done what you want to get done. So it's going to be interesting. One of the first questions I asked today, David, was just with all these resources available to you, what can you accomplish in this offseason and how much can get done in one offseason? Here's what Ryan Poles had to say to that.
I don't know if I can answer that specifically, but I can tell you that we have flexibility. We have flexibility where if there's opportunities where we can, turn that into a lot of players that come in to help us, we can do that. If it's staying put or really being selective with certain people, we can do that as well. So I know our expectation is that we move the needle to be more successful. We can win some of these close games and bring in guys that can impact this football team.
For those of us who watched Ryan Poles pound a couple of tables in press boxes at those close losses, it's clear that those close losses still bother him. But look, he knows what's here. And he used the phrase move the needle multiple times a day. He used the phrase taking the next step. And I think there's an understanding that this better look like a product that's moving in the right direction. Look, I think we can look within the division, look at what the Detroit Lions did within this season and say that's what it looks like at the end of a season. Even if you don't make the playoffs, it's really clear right now, right, that the direction that the Detroit Lions are headed in is the right one, right, and that they've built their foundation on solid ground and they're headed in that direction. So that's a good, it's strange to say here, right? Like, go look at Detroit for a good example, but here we are kind of pointing that out as something that the Bears should aspire to look like when they get to the end of the 2023 season.
It's a question that begs to be asked, and it's now 15 minutes into the pod and then just getting around to it, but I could not ignore the irony that Ryan Poles, on the morning that is designated for him to appear in front of the Bears media corps and the Bears fan base and essentially begin his offseason officially, the trust me appeal, right? You have to place the trust in Ryan Poles because he has all this cap space, the number 1 overall pick. And I've heard it termed that he controls the marketplace in the offseason, the most influential executive in the NFL, as has been suggested. On the same day that he appears, hours later, after he's done talking, one of his biggest maybe misreads or the biggest challenges of his first year, Roquan Smith signs a $100 million contract with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, you can make the argument about how he fits better in that scheme. You can make the argument about how the Bears weren't in a position to pay him that because they have so many other needs. You can make a lot of arguments, but I know this. The Ravens are a franchise in an organization that you trust, that doesn't need to ask for credibility because they already have it. And when they make the determination that this player is worth $100 million, an off-the-ball linebacker, the highest paid off-the-ball linebacker in NFL history now, I've got to wonder why he was let go from Chicago. Again, I know it is revisionist history, and I know the situations are different. I know it's not a premium position. Roquan Smith is a Pro Bowl linebacker, now worth $100 million to the Baltimore Ravens. It's just the irony of having Ryan Poles' maybe biggest misread, something he may regret moving forward, come on a day that he's asking and looking ahead. The Roquan Smith, I'm happy for him. He still doesn't have an agent, but boy, imagine that commission.
Well, look, some of this is philosophical, right? And you're trying to figure out what a organization values. I was always really eager to see what Roquan Smith would command on the open market. He never got to the open market, so we know that one team was willing to give him 5 years and $100 million, and it sounds like $45 million in guarantees. I have not seen the full details of the contract to see how it's structured, but look, like at the time the trade was made, the reason it left me a little unsettled is because this team had so few difference makers, right? So few guys that were impact playmakers that could change games for you. And I'm always weary of subtracting those guys from your roster if there are other options available to you. At the same time, I don't know that I would pay that much for Roquan Smith because I didn't see enough, as Matt Eberflus didn't, of ball production, of game-changing moments that truly flipped a game, which flips a month, which flips a season from Roquan Smith over his time here. He's a really good player. I just don't know if he's one of the elite defenders in the league that commands this type of respect financially when you're trying to build around him. So you and I think, disagree a little bit on that front. To go along with that, today in the comments that we heard from Ryan Poles, he self-identified 3 positions that he identified as premium positions that he wants to start with as he's restocking this roster, and they were pass rusher, offensive line, and cornerback.
In that order.
Right. And so that was notable, and I guess we're still learning Ryan Poles a lot. And time will tell whether that's a lie. If he goes out and invests in a bunch of receiver help and just use this as cover to do so, then that changes the topic. If he goes out and gets interior defensive linemen and stresses that, then that changes the topic. But those were 3 really off the cuff, quick, instinctive remarks that he gave of positions that he wants to fill there. And you don't hear, off the ball linebacker in that conversation. And so that, part of this is philosophical. Good for Roquan. I'm glad he's found that second contract finally. I'm glad he can put that angst and anxiety away for a little while and be valued the way he believes he deserved to be valued. I just don't know that it was necessarily a misstep by this general manager to make that decision when push came to shove.
When you have so little talent on a roster, I just don't understand how you can allow Pro Bowl talent to get out the door and to escort it out the door. I feel like he let his personal feelings interfere with his professional judgment. And I look at what the Bears don't have. And so you're in a position where, you could always afford things. If you can always buy things that you can afford. And the Bears are in a position to have, they're living large. They've got over $100 million in cap space. This would not have been something that they could not have fit under the cap. That's all I mean is in looking at everything is relative to these teams. And what they got in return now in retrospect doesn't seem like that great of a haul for a Pro Bowl linebacker worth the highest paid contract in NFL history at the position. So I have, that's not the focus of the day, and that may seem negative to some people to dwell on it, but it just is impossible to ignore when that transaction is announced a couple hours after Ryan Poles, faces the media for the first time of this offseason.
Well, also to your point, there's been an open acknowledgement here by coaches and players that the trades of Robert Quinn and Roquan Smith sent this team reeling, as it was expected they would. They were moves made with a longer term view in mind, but you shook the locker room a little bit. You removed two defensive captains, two respected leaders, and it takes time to build some of that back up when you're asking every single player in this locker room to give you everything they have, and then you take away two guys that would give them everything they had and give them production that helped make their jobs easier. It's a difficult sell. Now, look, like this will all kind of play out in the years to come. We'll see how Roquan produces now that he has been paid. Does he stay as motivated? Does he stay as productive? We'll see where the Bears go in rebuilding a defense that, again, in several categories was historically bad. I think their 20 sacks was the second fewest in the history of the franchise, and obviously we documented the other day how difficult it was for them to stop the run and that they gave up more rushing yards this season than any team in 103 seasons. And so they've got to find answers there. And just as they've got to figure out what direction they're going to take with the guy that wears the number 1 jersey, who has the city in the palm of his hand right now.
What other cuts from Ryan Poles do you want to address?
Yeah,
that were telling to you?
Well, let's go right there with Justin Fields, because obviously it was a necessary question, and I believe it was Patrick Finley of the Sun-Times who asked it to get the general manager's take on the quarterback and to ask about, hey, what about that number 1 pick? Is there a possibility that gets used on a quarterback? Here was that exchange.
Do you plan on Justin Fields being your starting quarterback next year?
Yeah, we had good conversations. I'm excited for the direction he's going, and as I mentioned before, he knows where he has to improve. I think you mentioned that the other day. So we're excited about his development and where he goes next. He showed ability to be impactful with his legs. There's flashes with his arm. Now if we can put that together, I think we have something really good.
Because you have the first pick, there are people that sit there and go, a quarterback might be available there. But you're saying Justin's your guy.
Well, we're going to do the same as we've always done. We're going to evaluate the draft class. And I would say this, I'd have to be absolutely blown away to make that type of decision.
Yeah, so there you have it on the record, right? And that will be revisited when we get to May, and we'll figure out which direction this heads. But it also led into a discussion that was additionally productive about how the general manager truly views Justin Fields, and we can get into some of that in a second.
I heard the question asked if he was a starter for 2023, and Ryan Poles is one of those guys that when he's answering questions, he's from the Northeast, but it does something that a lot of people in the Midwest do. Like, first of all, they say, "Oh yeah." Okay, so when he was asked a question about if Justin Fields is your starter in 2023, his first response was, "Yeah." So was he answering yes to the question of is he was a starter, or was that just a verbal tick that he has, and he's just saying, yeah? I'm just curious, in the room, was he answering the question yes or no? Because it's not you're not in a court of law, you're not on a stand, but it just was interesting because the way that his words are parsed.
I'll go back and do my my weekly rewatch of the Bears and just watch his body language and his words there. But no, I think he was just answering yes directly to the question and saying, yes, he's our starter. And then obviously answering the follow-up and saying, hey, we have to do our due diligence. That's what you do in this position. And we'll see if there's anything that blows us away, right? Like that's going to be the interesting topic. That's it's going to fuel, debate shows on television, on cable for months here.
Because that little crack that he left the door open. I get that. Yeah. And you and I think agree on the fact that they have come too far with Justin Fields to abandon that now. And so, as you said the other day, see it through. Yeah. I think that they do have to see it through because this is the way that you're going to win. This is the way you have to find a way to win with him, around him, because of him. And I think that's what you heard today. Ryan Poles, without confirming, acknowledging that that's the most likely path for the Bears to go.
And he went further in his evaluation of Justin, and I thought it was notable to hear him say, in that clip that we just heard, he said he's impactful with his legs and he has flashes with his arm, right? And so that's a very calculated way of saying the running game is there. We're not concerned with that. We are excited about that. We know what kind of fuel that gives to everything we do. Now the flashes with the arm have to turn into consistent passing talent. And what Ryan Poles elaborated on is that Justin needs to continue to allow the game to slow down for him mentally. Those were the general manager's words, and he has to react quicker to what he sees. Those are the general manager's words. Those are honest, fair assessments of why the quarterback was a part of the passing game struggles in 2022. Fair to acknowledge. I think he also said that Justin is in a growth mindset, and that's something they truly value here as a guy that understands the need to improve, is ready to attack improvement in the offseason going forward with an understanding of how far he needs to go in that regard. This organization has been consistent from the front office to the coaching staff over the last several months in identifying that Justin Fields, the passer, has not arrived. It's okay to say that out loud. The general manager and the coaching staff has said that out loud for several months here. And so now it's their job collectively to get that on the right track. I had someone say to me recently, I can't even remember who it was, but they said that, look, in this world, there are people that know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. I'm not one of them. There are people that don't know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And then there are people that know how to solve a Rubik's Cube and can do it for speed competitions, right? And playing quarterback in the NFL is solving the Rubik's Cube in a speed competition. And there's two different things. Justin Fields, I think everyone believes, can solve the Rubik's Cube. Now he's got to speed it up to the effect that he can do it in a speed competition. You can go look up on the YouTube videos, and I'm doing all the mannerisms here. That's what's next for him, and that's part of the processing and growth and reaction piece of the puzzle that they've got to get solved.
I used to really like those, but then you kind of learn how to do them, then you kind of forget how to do them. So
you were successfully able to do one at one point in your life?
At one point when I was very young, I could do those, and then I didn't do it for a couple of years. And for me, it never really came back. But there was a muscle memory involved, and there was just a lot of things that happened instinctively. Yeah, okay, that's a really good analogy. I get what you're saying. What else stood out to you about what Poles had to say? Because he wasn't that detailed about a lot of things, but I think he touched on different areas and things that we needed to hear from him.
Yeah, so these 2 points go hand in hand, because another thing he said about Justin Fields is he felt like the chemistry piece of his development is important, that he has to have time on task with specific people, right? Like the guys he's throwing the ball to have to be consistent, and that wasn't always the case in 2022. He believes that, and we'll get to more of this in a second, that Cole Kmet's chemistry with Justin Fields is what allowed Cole Kmet to have a promising season. Well, now you've got to develop that with pieces that are already here or pieces you bring in the building. One of those guys that's already here is Chase Claypool. As you know, he gets to the end of 2022 with a huge question mark on his Chicago Bears ledger. And while Ryan Poles says that he's not blinking in terms of the trade he made, giving up the 32nd overall pick to bring Chase Claypool to Chicago, the rest of the world is going, oh, hold on a minute. Like, we just haven't seen enough here to believe that this is going to be an unqualified success. And so there was a little bit of a discussion about the Chase Claypool trade and where it's at and where it's headed. Here's some of that.
Evaluation of Claypool. We had 14 catches in 7 games. I think a lot of people are joining him. Weaker receiving for a lot of people talk to you. Slow down a lot more than that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's the difference between like trades in baseball and basketball. It's like plug and play. There's an entire off season and half of a season of installs and all the things that you need to do collectively to play and execute offensive play. On top of that, it was a little bit choppy with Justin getting dinged up. He got dinged up. So it was a little bit choppy of a start. I told Chase, and we had a really good conversation, I'm not blinking at that one at all. I think he's going to help us moving forward, and I'm excited about it.
I understand the skepticism around the trade, and I even will remain to be skeptical in a healthy way, hopefully, and hold him accountable for that deal. But I also understand it. And I also think that I'm going to be consistent, because when he made it, I thought it was a good, smart move, because it was trying to get ahead of the free agent class. And I am not going to – here's the one thing that I think there's a disconnect with Bears fans, and not necessarily Bears fans, because we don't need to talk about Bears fans. I think we're going to talk about how we see what's happening and moving forward. Moving forward, to me, it's not consistent to – say that Justin Fields struggled or his progress was limited by lack of an offensive line and a wide receiving core, because I think those are factors that contributed to his stunted development or why he hasn't gotten where he needs to go as a passer. So if you want to accept that as a premise, and I do, then I think you've got to take the same approach with Chase Claypool. This is a passing game that is broken. This is a passing game that threatened nobody. There are a lot of factors involved. Justin Fields is part of that. The offensive line is part of that. And so his own role in it is part of that. But I'm not willing to give up on him just because he had an uneven second half of the season after he came to Pittsburgh and they flourished without him. I think that in the offseason, it's all about talent acquisition. And if you're Ryan Poles and you're a scout and you're trained to look at it that way, you look at Chase Claypool, and you might not have DeAndre Hopkins there. You're not looking at Devontae Adams, but you are looking at a guy that could be a very capable number two, or somebody who could be explosive as he was as a rookie. So I am not willing to give up on him or declare that a bad trade just yet.
Well, no one should give up on him at this point. And I think Ryan Poles was forward in saying also that the continuity piece was missing, that Justin Fields missed 2 starts due to injury and Chase Claypool missed 2 other starts due to injury. So there's 4 opportunities on a Sunday late in the season that those 2 guys didn't have an opportunity to work together and work on that timing, work on that chemistry, work on that rapport. It leads into the other discussion, though, that I thought there was some subtext to some of the things that Ryan Poles said on Tuesday morning about the receiver position, and sort of saying that he believes that the need for a number 1 receiver isn't as pronounced as the outside world may think. You know, that he thinks that there may be some guys in-house that can fill that role if you surround the entire receiving core and you add a pass catching tight end into the mix, and you can just make the stable of pass catchers better. But man, I think that's gonna stun a lot of Bears fans if we get to week 1 of next season and there's not an obvious addition made that is, okay, this is a guy who has a chance to be a true difference making pass catcher for your young and developing quarterback. It was kind of, I don't know if that was, again, like a general manager trying to hide intent for free agency in the draft, or if it's almost an acknowledgement that the free agent class isn't very strong and the draft class is always I don't know, can't tell proposition. He was trying to keep expectations tempered, but that was a small little thing that was kind of subtly woven into today's proceedings.
Yeah, I thought it was that. I thought he was trying to temper expectations because of what was available and maybe not available. Speaking of difference makers, David Montgomery's name came up as well. Thought it was interesting how he addressed the question about David Montgomery's future. He is out of contract. He seems to be taking stock of everything, or he was on Sunday after the final game, taking pictures at midfield, the Soldier Field, like it might have been his last game as a Bear. We don't know that. This is what Ryan Poles had to say when asked about David Montgomery's uncertain future.
I've always wanted to keep David. I love his mentality, how he plays the game. I told him that to his face, and it comes from, he's part of the identity that we had this year that kept us competitive. Now, the second part of that is just the contract situation. That's something that we'll see how that goes, and if we can find common ground. I've learned that you can want a player, and the value's got to come together for it to happen. But I love the way that he attacked this season. Like that's a guy that does everything right. And you all watched his tenacity, his fight. Like I'm a big David Montgomery fan.
The business of football, David, is a cruel, cruel thing, man. Like to have those personal emotions about a guy and then realize that, you may not value him at a price tag that allows you to keep him is pretty telling and interesting about what this world is in the cutthroat world of NFL football. It'll be really interesting to see if David Montgomery's back in that locker room the next time we're in there.
I don't think that he's going to go out and sign a $100 million contract. I don't think that I don't think it's guarantees coming back to the Bears either. So it is going to be tricky. Here's the thing that will help determine his worth in the open market. You can't ignore that it's a very crowded free agent running back field. The marketplace, talk about supply and demand. He very conceivably could fall back into the Bears price range if he overvalues himself and doesn't get what he thinks that he is worth. And I think that Ryan Poles was honest about David Montgomery today, and I thought that was refreshing because he didn't try to keep, his feelings concealed so he didn't drive up the price or anything silly like that. David Montgomery has been a very good Chicago Bear, third-round draft pick who got first-round treatment and fulfilled a lot of expectations. Not healthy always, but if he came back and was the Bears featured back, I think you could live with that. I think you could win with him.
When Ryan gushes about a guy, you kind of sit up in your chair because you can feel the sincerity in it, right? Like it's not hollow, and it's been that way since he got here. And so there are those moments where you say, okay, this is truly a player who's made an impression on his boss and has earned that trust and that admiration, which is important. The other interesting question, though, David, to go along with this, Ryan Poles was also very complimentary of Darnell Mooney and saying, like, he'll be back on the field in the spring, hopefully, and that's another guy that they really like. But I asked directly, who are the players beyond Justin, with all the talk that we have about Justin Fields in this town? Who are the other players in-house on this roster right now that you identify as blue chip core building blocks for you? And I was expecting a list of 5, 6, 7 names that the general manager was going to spout off, maybe going even too far down the list where we go, okay, no, now he's stretching it. He named us one. David, he named us one guy. It came right off the tip of his tongue. He said Cole Kmet, and then he stopped. He couldn't get any further. So I mean, like, if that wasn't an illuminating moment of the state of the quality of this roster right now, I don't know what was. I don't know when you were listening to that, what you thought of when you were like, oh my God, like we literally went Kmet, hard stop.
It was a hard stop. What I thought initially was, you asked the question, you must have been a plant because you knew he was only going to mention Cole Kmet.
No, listen, like I see the football. I see the football world like high-level general managers in this league. That's all I'm saying, right? And so, like, we're on the same page. We all realize who Cole was, who he's become. Like, I was on top of this from the start.
It did stand out though, because there are other players that would qualify and justify maybe being in that range. Jaquan Brisker comes to mind.
Jalen
Johnson. I think that the fact that he stopped after Cole Kmet, if Jalen Johnson is watching this as closely as the media that cover him, maybe he was bothered by that. Like, hey, what about me? But I definitely thought the same thing. It's not a long list, and it underscored just how talent deficient this roster really is, and heading into the 2023 season where expectations, well, he was asked about expectations. Ryan Poles at the end of the news conference, wasn't it, Dan? He was asked about the expectations for 2023 and what's realistic, and this is what he had to say.
To get better, to continue to bring guys in that we need to win more games. So some of those tight games I want to finish better. And bringing in some more playmakers is going to allow us to do that. So the expectation is to take that next step. I want to stair-step this thing to the top and then stay up there as absolutely long as possible. And you got to be I always go back to making sound decisions. And sometimes when you don't make sound decisions in the short term, it can look really good. But then it's what happens after. So we want to make decisions that can last a long time, so we can stay at the top. You don't have the peak and then the drop off after.
David, that stair-step model is terrific. And I wrote this in my column for ChicagoTribune.com that this is the ideal way to look at this thing. It's the practical way to look at this thing, to try to find the path that allows you to sustain success. It just feels like it's a pie in the sky aspiration inside these walls here at Halas Hall, because in the 30 years post Mike Ditka, they've had 11 last place finishes and 4 playoff victories. The last time, as we've documented many times, that they had 3 consecutive winning seasons was in 1988. You were just a kid back then. It's just like you hear those goals spoken and you're like, yeah, heck yeah. Like, this is what you should be pursuing. And then you're like, man, why has it been so damn difficult for this organization to come anywhere close to having a run of sustained success? So I wish Ryan all the best. And I hope that over time, all these resources, particularly in this offseason, provide him the opportunity to make that stair-step climb feel like an escalator.
More context courtesy of the Chicago Tribune. From 2002 to 2021, 97 teams finished with at least 12 losses. The next season, 15 of those 97 won the division. 22 made the playoffs. Only 29 finished above 500. 37 finished in last place in the division, and 50 of the 97 teams that finished with at least 12 losses the next season had double-digit losses. That, to me, underscored where the expectation level likely will be when the Bears return to training camp next July, regardless of how things go in free agency, regardless of how well it goes in the draft. We talked to Dave Wannstedt on the Mully and Haugh show. He projected that you could get realistically 4 starters in free agency, 4 starters in the draft. That gives you 8 new starters on a team that needs a lot. So I think
8 new starters and 4 of them rookie starters, right?
And the Bears led all teams in rookie snaps, as Ryan Poles reminded us at the podium, by 1,000 snaps, I think it was, Dan. So I guess the final answer about expectations was a good reminder to temper them heading into next season. You can get as excited, I think, as exciting about what you feel about free agency, about the draft, and all the possibilities. This is great for our business. It's great for the NFL. But once you get back to the football matters and playing opponents, the numbers make it really difficult for to predict playoff type success next year. But they just want to sustain it, and I guess this is the next step on the ladder.
Well, and look, like those numbers you just rattled off, like part of our duty in covering this football team is to distinguish possibility from probability, right? And trying to do that in a way that's healthy overall. And then people can do whatever they want in their own personal lives to approach it that way. But it's just a responsibility to provide the context and the perspective that go along with it. I think there have been a lot of things throughout the course of this weird season that have been misinterpreted on both sides of the argument. I think there are people arguing against things that have never been said on both sides. I'm guilty of it at times, and people on the other extreme are guilty of it at times. I think what I've tried to do throughout this period is just to limit exaggeration, right? And to make sure that celebrations are in line with the actual achievement and the actual significance of things. And sometimes you get hard, heavy pushback for that, and you get accused of things that aren't there. But that's just part of kind of sounding this out. And I think this entire year, right? Like, I think there's going to be an opportunity here very soon to decompress and take a step back from all that. But I think there is a healthy middle ground in the discourse that hopefully this podcast is helping produce, and we can continue to make those steps. But I think you'd agree with this, that like one of the things I wrote in today's piece at ChicagoTribune.com is that the celebration in this town is a never again jamboree, right? Like, I think everyone agrees that never again are we going to celebrate 14 losses and the number 1 pick. And now it's about producing and showing progress and showing results. And that 2023 for everyone is going to provide clarity that didn't exist in 2022. And that clarity is going to be hella refreshing, for all of us to experience.
It's the inaugural Jubilee. It's not the first annual Jubilee. There's not going to be another one if they lose 14 games next season. And I think they, in some ways, I described it on the radio, this was their redshirt year for Ryan Poles. Now you have a 4-year window realistically. That was Dave Wannstedt's time frame too, that you look at a 4-year window with Justin Fields as the quarterback, you build around him, and you hope to get to where you want to go. And what we're going to do is, I think, focus on and work hard at trying to do this in the offseason is the developments, the people that talk, the people that make the news, cover those people, not cover the coverage so much, because what happens then is you kind of lose focus or lose the point. What's going on at Haugh is very important. So the people they bring in, the people they go out to see, the people they talk to, the people they hire, as Matt Eberflus turns his staff over, perhaps. And he talked about that today, and that was interesting. So we'll continue to cover those things, evaluate those things, and the rest of it kind of is noise. Sometimes it's interesting noise, and we'll allow that to kind of fester in as well. But I think that you want to keep your eye on the ball as much as possible, because this is going to be an offseason unlike any other that we've covered at Haugh for the Bears.
It's going to be an offseason of a lot of introductions. I'll tell you that much. And there are going to be a lot of new faces that are really significant to the direction of this franchise that we're going to meet. Again, starting with the team president soon, and then getting onto the free agency class, and then getting onto the draft class. And then, usually Mother's Day weekend right around there is when okay, any roster moves from here are going to be kind of on the periphery, and they're just going to be minor moves. And you'll know by the early stages of May what your 2023 Bears depth chart looks like. And then, then some really real expectations can be set on what, quote unquote, taking the next step really means for this team.
Cool. So what we'll do is that on Friday of this week, when we get our usual podcast, we will look at some of the staff changes, possibilities, look at what's going on around the National Football League as it pertains to the Bears, bring you up to date as much as anything in terms of draft chatter, what other teams are saying, what Indy and Houston and these kinds of things. But we will be here periodically throughout the offseason, just keeping you up to date as the Bears continue this quest to get back to sustaining success.
Plus, we've got a weekend of playoff football to preview, including up in Minnesota, the new Coach Bowl between Kevin O'Connell and Brian Daboll. By the way, you successfully pegged the Minnesota Vikings to win the North this year. And so kudos to you. Maybe we'll bring back some of those projections either later this week or early next week on some of the things we said before the season, that we can do a whole bunch of back padding.
I wasn't really going to remind you of that until Friday, but I think that I was eventually going to remind you of that. Yeah, that'll be fun. First weekend, the Super Wild Card weekend is right around the corner. So, all right, is there anything else we left out, Dan? Because I think Ryan Poles gave us a lot to talk about, and it's going to be an exciting offseason.
Going down my list of notes, I don't see anything that we missed. So thorough. And we close the doors here at Haugh until the next time we're here.
Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast. Download, listen, and subscribe. Let us know some feedback. Also, you can watch us on the 670 The Scores YouTube channel. You can listen to us on your Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcasts. For Dan Wiederer and Adam Sudzinski, I'm David Haugh. We will talk to you on Friday. Thanks for listening to Take the North.
Great talk. See you out there.